Good Sunday afternoon, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to the Southern Oregon Weather Weekend Update. We're going to start with a recap of the storm system that just blew through, and then move into our short-term forecast. What can we expect for the rest of the week? We might be seeing another weekend system for this coming Saturday, so we'll discuss whether that's a reasonable possibility, and then we'll look at some long-range model trends. So first, Mount Ashland received about 4 inches of snowfall from this system. Some of that came in yesterday morning, so Friday night into early Saturday. But looking at the webcam this morning, it looks like they received a little bit more snow overnight. They're reporting 2 inches for the last 24 hours as of 6 a.m. And honestly, that's what we were expecting in terms of snowfall, 2 to 4 inches. Some of the models were showing the potential for 6 to 7 inches. But if you watched our last video, we discussed how that was probably a little bit unrealistic. And so the 2 to 4 inches verified. Some areas did pick up a little bit more. There were reports of Siskiyou Summit seeing about 6 inches of snow. So maybe the models, in some cases, were correct. Some areas saw slightly heavier amounts, but in general, 2 to 4 inches. Interestingly, a lot of the snowtail sites didn't record a measurable change in snow depth, but obviously, if we look at the road cams around the area, here's Lake of the Woods. Obviously, most places did receive a couple inches of snow, so generally in line with our forecast. So what's going on right now? The KMAX radar on top of Mount Ashland is showing light showers, generally moving across northern Jackson County, maybe a few flurries across the Siskiyous. And these showers look to continue for the rest of the day. This is the high-resolution rapid refresh model. It's a high-resolution model. Interestingly, unlike some of the other higher resolution models, this one does not tend to overdo precipitation amounts, in my opinion. In fact, sometimes it fails to pick up on some shower activity that is going to happen. So I'm showing it here because I think it's maybe a little more conservative than some of the other models like the WRF. And you can see this loop starts out at about noon on Sunday today and then moves into Sunday night. And you can see some of these showers developing across Jackson County and then more showers moving in tonight from the southwest. This shower activity should just add up to another couple tenths of an inch of precipitation. Here is the WPC, the Weather Prediction Center. Once again, I'm including the WPC forecast because it's quite accurate. If we look at our skill scores here, our verification, the WPC, shown by the red bars, is quite a ways ahead of some of the other models that we've talked about, like the NAM, the GFS, and the ECM, the European model. So what is the Weather Channel calling for over the next few days? Once again, I'm including the Weather Channel because it too is quite accurate. Here for San Francisco, we see that for the last year, on the whole, the Weather Channel was about 8 percentage points, 7 percentage points more accurate than the National Weather Service digital forecast, which is quite an improvement. So that's why I'm showing it to you. You can see the showers in the forecast for today and tonight, but then warming and drying through the middle of the week before turning somewhat cloudy over the weekend. And the reason for that, if we look at the Canadian Ensemble, this is about 3 days out, 4 days out, 10 a.m. on Wednesday. We see all these orange and red colors once again building over the Pacific Northwest. This is actually what's called a Rex block pattern, where we have an area of high pressure to the north and then an area of low pressure stuck to the south here. And this area of low pressure is going to send some more rain into Southern California, but we're not really going to see that rain. It's mainly going to be pushed south of us due to this Rex block pattern. However, by the weekend, we could see the potential for yet another system moving in. This is the GFS, the American model. And starting at about Friday night, it shows this system dropping down the coast from the north and pulling in quite a bit of cold air. Maybe the potential for some low elevation snow if this forecast verifies. This is what's called sometimes an inside slider system, which is kind of a term that's been adapted from baseball, where you have these systems just dropping down along the coast from the north rather than moving in on a zonal flow from west to east. So it's a pretty cold pattern because the storm is dropping down from the north, but it's not particularly moist. These systems are sometimes hard to forecast because the amount of moisture that they pick up depends on how far they track over the water. So if these inside slider systems move out over the water and then turn in and move into Oregon, they can be pretty wet. However, if they track more over land, we could see cold air and maybe a few flurries or showers and not much else. So we'll have to see how this verifies. Here's the Canadian model showing the same thing, but you can see it tracks this system farther over water and it pulls in a lot more moisture. And in particular, this looks like it would result in quite a bit of snowfall, for the Tahoe area if this verifies. But again, we'll have to see how far this system tracks over water. So after that, what can we expect? Here is day 10 on all of the major ensembles. The Canadian ensemble, upper right-hand corner, the American ensemble, upper left, and the European ensemble. And all of them are showing ridging in the Gulf of Alaska here, and some form of troughing over the western and particularly southwestern United States. European is a little bit stronger with the troughing and storminess than the other models, but there's reasonable agreement that that's the kind of pattern we're going to see. Now, what's the reason for this? Well, we've talked about the PNA, the Pacific North American Index, and according to the GEFS, it's going to stay negative for most of the month of March. And that means that it's a pretty good bet that we could see at least cool conditions, maybe some wetter conditions, once again, depending on how far that trough shifts over the west coast. With this kind of a pattern, when there's ridging in the Gulf of Alaska, sometimes we just see, a few of those weak inside slider systems that just can't pick up a lot of moisture because the ridge here is pushing them inland and they can't track over the water too well. But regardless, this negative PNA indicates that we could see a pretty cool month of March overall. We've talked about the correlation with troughing and storminess here. These orange colors mean that there's going to be a trough in this general area when the PNA is negative. How about some of our other teleconnections? Well, here's the EPO, the Eastern Pacific Oscillation. And here we see that it's forecast to drop strongly negative by mid-month. And that results in this general pattern that the European ensembles are forecasting. Ridge in the Gulf of Alaska, troughing over some area of the United States. Sometimes this troughing can shift to the east, sometimes it can shift to the west. In this case, we have the EPO, the ridge up here, combined with the negative PNA. So that trough is going to probably sit over the southwest. When we have a negative EPO, that dumps a lot of cold air into the United States. It's just a question of where it's going to go. And it looks like it could head our direction, maybe a little more into the desert southwest because of some of the other teleconnection forecasts that we're seeing. So what about farther on? Here's day 14, day 15 to day 16 on the GEFS, the American ensembles, and the Canadian ensembles. They pretty much keep that negative EPO pattern going with the ridge over Alaska, some form of troughing over the U.S. However, you can see, especially on the American ensembles, these orange colors creeping toward the west coast and the trough moving more into the central United States. And in fact, if we look at the trends on both of these ensembles for the last 48 hours, so the past several model runs, we can see that they are bringing more ridging, or they're weakening the trough here in the west, and they're bringing less ridging or strengthening the trough in the east. So there's a trend to make the west a little warmer and drier, make the east a little bit cooler. And the reason for that, I think, is the Madden-Julian oscillation. So in the last video, we talked about how there was some uncertainty in the models about what the Madden-Julian oscillation was actually going to do. But interestingly, it looks like most models have gone back to what they were showing at the start, which is the MJO progressing into phases 6 and 7. For a while, the models were depicting this scenario, and then most of them kind of switched and showed the MJO just dying out and going into the null phase. However, they're back to showing the MJO progressing across the Indian Ocean into phases 6 and 7. And you can see when we look at the temperature correlations for the springtime for February, March, and April, you see phase 5 is a little bit warmer and drier. That reflects maybe the conditions we saw last week. Midweek, when it was warmer and drier. We'll see some more warm and dry days midweek this week. But then look at phase 6, a little cooler. Phase 7, even cooler here. And that's maybe when we could see the potential for those inside slider systems, the negative PNA bringing cooler and wetter conditions to the west. But then look at what happens. If the MJO keeps going into phase 8, that's actually a pretty warm signal for the western United States. So I think that's why maybe we're seeing the trends here on the ensembles for day 14 and day 15 to make the west warmer and drier and the east cooler and wetter. But we'll have to see if the MJO does progress into those warmer phases. For now, though, we have plenty of cooler and wetter conditions to talk about. And in fact, the CFSV2 wants to kind of keep this cooler, wetter, showery pattern going into April. But we'll just have to see how that verifies. For now, we have some showers continuing through tonight, and then in general drying and warming until Friday. We could see this inside slider type system bring light rain and snow to the area on Saturday, but once again we'll have to see how this pans out. The system could track farther over water and become a lot wetter, but it could also track farther inland and become a lot drier, and we could mainly just see some cooler air. The negative EPO pattern favors these general inside slider type systems, cooler and drier conditions. We'll see if this pattern continues. However, in late March, there is that possible warming trend if the MJO does progress into phase 8. However, it should be said, some models, like the CFSV2, do show a cool and kind of showery trend continuing into April. Guys, thanks so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to set your notifications for that midweek update in a few days. And please like, share, and subscribe.